Welcome back. Welcome to our mini session. We will again be pleased to hear from Mr. Scott Sorrels, our BSA National Commissioner. I'm glad that everyone could make it. And I forgot the title. Get back to Commissioner Service.
Title is whatever the National Commissioner wants to talk about.
Whatever the National Commissioner
That's
wants to
it.
talk about. That's great.
You can give him a title and he'll still talk about whatever is important.
I love it. I love it. Will he have his own mic there, Mike?
Yep. All right, can you hear me?
Yes. Yep. Great.
So welcome back. You know, I got to say, this group has inspired me. Listening to why you're here, and your scouting backgrounds, and the focus on the family, your faith, which is so important to who we are as an organization. We're not changing that, at least while this key 3 is in place. You've really lifted me up, so I want to thank you for that. You know, the last 2 or 3 years have been a little challenging for the planet, for the organization, for our families. Everybody has a story, whether it's the pandemic or economic issues or whatever it may be. And I keep reminding people to be kind to each other because you don't know what's going on in their life. I want to tell you a few stories about the scouting spirit and why we do what we do. You certainly live the scouting spirit. You understand, build relationships, change lives, and be in the heart. In the past couple of years, you know, there have been some challenging times. And, you know, by way of background, for instance, between the executive committee and the bankruptcy task force, we've met 300 times. Okay, in dealing with getting us through this little chapter in our history. So there were times I needed a lift up, okay? So I started looking for those stories. So I'm going to tell you some of those stories. And the first one actually comes out of the World Jamboree in 2019. And it was opening night for the participants. So at that point, we had 14,000 staff, about 50,000 people on site. So we had, I don't know, 30,000 people arriving on that Sunday and then through the night because planes were coming in to Charlotte just as fast as they could land. So you can do the quick math in your head of how many buses you have to drive from Charlotte, North Carolina to the Summit property in West Virginia to get 25,000 people on site in one day. It's a lot. Okay, typical scout camp, what does it do on day one? It rains like you wouldn't believe. It rains like people have been praying for rain out at Philmont the last couple of months. And it rained so hard it started washing out the roads. Okay, so we had to pull out the Summit team to rebuild the road system while we had all of these buses coming on to the site. And thankfully, the design of the Summit is you basically could drive a bus very close to where you're going to be camping. And with our model, we had the tents and everything there waiting on them, but they had to put up their site. It was this massive pod in the middle of their campsite. So my favorite story out of the Jamboree. Late on that Sunday, it's already raining, the roads are already washing out. We know we have some opportunities. And one of our American units is in their subcamp. They're already set up because we brought in the Americans, Canadians, and Mexicans a day early so they could be hosts and welcome the world to West Virginia and the BSA. frankly. And the Americans looked around their subcamp and tried to figure out who's going to be next to us and what time are they coming in. And one of the troops discovered that their next door neighbor was a group from Italy. And they weren't going to arrive until 3 o'clock in the morning. Okay, and then they would have to get off the bus after having traveled 25 hours and put up their campsite in the rain in order to get ready for their first day at the Jamboree. So what did the American Scouts do? They set up camp. Okay? It's a great Scout spirit story, right? It's not the end of the story. Okay? So the Italians arrive about 3 o'clock. They pile off and just throw their duffel bags in their tent and go to sleep. But only for about 2.5 hours. And then they got up and took over the kitchen of the Americans, took over their kitchen and their campsite, and cooked breakfast for the Americans. And woke them up singing Italian songs. The story still doesn't end there. Okay? That created, there's the most magical thing about the Jamboree was you had all of these cultures, religions, backgrounds, socioeconomic capabilities all coming together. And they were desperate to connect with each other. That the more different they were, the more they seemed to want to connect, to meet their friends. That's the program we didn't plan. We planned a lot of programs, but the most effective program at the Jamboree is these kids connecting. So continuing on, they started having these massive dinners. And we've seen this happen, Charles, at some other World Jamborees. But we ended up with multiple units. You'd have 50 units come together and string picnic tables from here to the other side of the villa and have this massive communal meal. They did it, because they're scouts. Another story coming out of the Jamboree, and this is about one of our dream team members. First met Megan Pearson at the Sweden Jamboree in 2011. I think Charles was involved in that introduction. She was then 16, I guess.
From the venturing crew, I think.
From the venturing crew. And we needed a male and female American Scout to go to the reception with the King and Queen of Sweden. He's the chair of the World Scout Foundation. And all of the other dignitaries. And we needed somebody to represent as well. So Megan comes to our attention, and we get introduced to her, and we explain to her, okay, well, we would like you to join us at this reception. She was naturally a little intimidated by that opportunity, but she went into this room and literally took it over with her personality and her stories. It was just amazing to watch. And I think she and the Queen became best buddies. And the Queen is the one that ABBA, remember the group ABBA? Dancing Queen? That's the Queen, okay? And they actually performed in Sweden. I think Charles and I knew who they were. I'm not sure many of the participants knew who they were. But Megan, we decided to organize a dream team for Jamboree, a group of 3 youth from each of the 3 co-hosts, because at my age, then 56, I'm not qualified to design a program for an 18-year-old or a 17-year-old, right? They have to be at the table. That's one thing we don't do very well. So we formed a dream team, and Megan became part of the dream team. And they were great in giving us perspective and advice and telling us what didn't work, and helping us design the logo and the theme and all those sorts of things. Then we got closer to the event. They were actually helping to design the program. And then we really got close to the event. About 2 years out, they came to us and said, I don't want to be just a token youth representative. I want to be part of the management and execution of the event. Okay, so we moved them out of an advisory role and put them in as deputy department chairs throughout the Jamboree. And Megan was a deputy department chair, as was every member of the dream team. You would not believe how well these young people performed. In fact, for the Jamboree, we had of the 14,000 staff, 49% were under 29 years old. Yeah, think about that. Put a BSA National Jamboree template on that type of youth participation. And they brought that same spirit of the Americans and the Italians, they brought it to the staff, and they fundamentally changed the character of that event. And one of the things we have to do, and we have an initiative waiting to go, it's called Catalyst, is basically figure out how to keep young people connected with scouting through their 20s and into their 30s. Why do we say, you know, get your eagle, get your vigil, get your whatever, come back when you have a kid when you're 33? It makes no sense. They are begging for a connection. And it needs to be on their terms. If they are in college and they can only give us a weekend for a camporee in a year, that's a win. Because they may be an assistant district commissioner in 3 years at age 27. So watch out for catalysts. Continuing the Megan story, Megan went on to graduate from Cornell, pretty good school, with a degree in chemical engineering. And she's now helping run a plant for ExxonMobil. So Rex Tillerson, our former president and CEO of ExxonMobil, he may have a successor. And she's now running for the Inter-American Committee, which is basically the Americas, and is involved in our international committee as a full member. So one of the things I think we need to do as a movement is we need to connect to keep that 20-something, young 30-something in the program. But we do it in a way to support local councils. So what if you're a scout executive or a director of program in your local council and you have a list of 75 20-somethings in your council who are willing and interested in helping deliver a program? They want to be a force of change in their life. And they want to get back to scouting. We haven't given them a way to do it. So if you had that resource, could that work? I think it could. Maybe throw in a little business networking in it to help them advance their careers. Something we're thinking about, and I think it'll work. So I look for great things from Megan and that generation and what they pulled off to make the Jamboree successful is the best story of the Jamboree. I'll tell you a story that's more relevance to what Philmont has gone through recently. Met a young man named Elliot Pacer. Elliot is now 21. He's an Eagle Scout from Atlanta, Georgia. And Elliot spoke at Friends of Scouting lunch for the Atlanta Area Council. And it was an intimidating room. I mean, the board in Atlanta, the group in Atlanta is a pretty strongly connected group. You want to be on the board if you live in that community. We had 1,100 people at lunch. Okay. Raised $3 million. Pretty good day. But Elliot was the keynote. So he comes up and introduces himself and basically explains that he was born on the autism spectrum, had wonderfully supportive parents, but they had the wisdom to get him involved in scouting. And even though in his life he had heard time and again all the things he could not do, as soon as he got in scouting, all of the leaders that he was involved with, and all of his peers, his new friends, never told him he had any limitations. In fact, they told him he had no limitations and made sure that was the case. He went on to become the lodge chief for the Atlanta area 08 Lodge. He became the staff director for Bird Adams Scouting, which is a big operation. He is now studying, I forget the exact name of the degree. Basically, it's forest fighting. But he is learning to be a forest fighter. And this is the part that connects to Philmont very well, because we've had a rough recent history. And I don't know if you've been down to see the burn scar down by Kit Carson. But it is really sobering of how close it got to seriously harming the property. We lost Zastrow, of course. We lost some other facilities in that area, and about 3,000 acres. And one of the heartwarming stories of that time for me is, in fact, it hadn't occurred to me in this room. The fire management team came here and planned the response to the fires in this area of Mexico. And we brought in a team and we fed them. And they stayed in the duplexes. And they said they've never had an experience like that of hot food and a place to plan and execute. And these are folks, these are strike teams that were out in the valley of Yaddo Creek fighting the fire with hand tools and calling in helicopter drops on specific trees that were flaming, because the embers from those trees can blow 2 miles. And there were days that we were dealing with 70-mile-an-hour sustained winds. We could have very easily have lost Philmont all the way to the U Park fire. So, what happened one night in May? And you cannot tell me divine intervention wasn't involved. Okay? The winds died down. We started to get some moisture, and then we got about 4 inches of snow in May. And that helped us turn the corner on that fire. And the fire, when you go down and look at it, Zastrow was a metal roof building that literally has melted in on itself. There is a Dutch oven that is to the left of Zastrow. There's a bunch of them there. But the one that they'd obviously been cooking with most recently has literally melted. Have you ever seen a lodge oven that is melted? I mean, the lid is bent over the bowl. Show you how violent it got. Yeah, when you go over to the flagpoles are fine. The guy wires from the flags are untouched, 30 feet away. So we had a lot of heroic activity here that helped save Philmont in this area of New Mexico. So someone had the wisdom to ask Elliot, why would you want to be a firefighter? Particularly a wilderness firefighter. And he says, well, I was taught in scouting to give back to my community. And I decided I wanted to be there on the worst day that some people are ever going to have in their lives, because I want to try to help them. So that's an Eagle Scout. That's scouting in action. It still works every day. He's now with a volunteer fighting force, and he'll eventually become part of the strike teams that have to go all over the country to help people in need. So that's Elliot. He introduced 5 people in his life that have made the difference. His parents, of course. The other 4, Scoutmaster, OA advisor, fellow Eagle Scout, 1 male and 1 female. And those were the people that had most influenced his life and his decision-making process. The next story is involving a young lady from Wisconsin, and her name is Kaylee. And Kaylee started feeling poorly last December and ended up in the hospital with a leukemia diagnosis. Obviously, devastating situation for the family. And she started taking the chemo and the radiation and whatever else was prescribed, and she did not do well with the treatment plan. She ended up in the hospital, paralyzed, and on a ventilator. And things were not looking too well. The scouting community in that area of the country came together for this family in ways that you would not believe, and really made a difference. And the first indication that the family had that, we're going to pull out of this thing, that she's coming back to us, couldn't really easily communicate except mumbling, was the first thing she wanted to do. From the hospital tray there on the iPad was she wanted to zoom into her Scouts BSA girls troop when they did the Scout Oath and Scout Walk. That's all she could do. She had to sign off then. But it meant that much to her. We talk about living the Scout Oath and Scout Walk. I can tell you that's a young woman who understands why she is in Scouting. She understands the values that she gets out of the program. Now, luckily, the story gets better. She does get out of the hospital, and as of late May, she was back meeting with her girl troop and was excited because she was teaching herself how to feed herself again with her right hand. And her troop is surrounding her in love and respect and support. And we have inundated the family on a respectful level with love and support and care packages. So Kaylee is special to me, and the Scout community there has been amazing. The Scout community around the country has responded to that family. The last one's very personal, and we'll see how I do. This involves our grandson, who's Grayson. Grayson is now 6 years old. And our daughter, Lauren, his mom. She's 35 now. And Grayson was born with some special opportunities that we're helping him through. Great kid, smart kid. Unfortunately, we lost his father, Lauren's husband, to COVID last year. And, it's a tough time. And Lauren, by personality, is like her other daughter, not really a social animal. Didn't have much of a social network. So one of the first things we did is we were trying to figure out how do we support the family. Is we need to get Grayson to come scouting, right? So we did. So Lauren went to the recruiting meeting, the open night, or whatever you want to call it, and they got to that point in the meeting that I expect some of you experienced, where they're organizing the Cub Pack, but they need den leaders, and they need somebody to raise their hand, okay? And that's when everybody pulls out their phone and sits on their hands. Okay? Well, Lauren raised her hand. And she came home that night and calls me about 10:30 that night. She doesn't call at 10:30 at night. What do you do if you're a parent when your kids call you at 10:30 at night, right? You certainly answer the phone and you wonder what's going on, right? How can we help? And she says, "Oh my God, Dad, what have I done?" She volunteered to be a den leader. I said, "It's going to be okay. We've got we have a slide up here about resources. We have all of these resources available for you. We can get you trained." we have materials that will take you through the first 24 hours, 36 hours, first DIN meeting. You know, we can make you a success. And sure enough, she accomplished everything in about 3 weeks, had her first DIN meeting that was phenomenal. And she has the most diverse DIN you've ever seen. They speak like 4 languages in this group, a group of 8 kids. Grayson recently graduated, bridged, whatever you want to call it, out of Lyons, and we had an assembly where I got to put the necker around his neck for the next rank. And after I did that, he looks at the assembled crowd and raises his arms and screams, "I finally graduated." I don't know what that means to a 6-year-old, but I do know it means Cub Scouting is working for him, right? So he's on his scouting journey, and love to see him get Eagle one day. About 3 months, 4 months later, the phone rings at 10:30 at night. It's Lauren. Oh my God, what have I done? What does a Cub Pack committee chair do? I said, it's going to be okay. You know, we've got the resource materials. We can take you through it. We can get you trained. So my plan is coming together pretty well. Yeah. The other amazing thing that happened is that the scouting community in the area she lives in, Cumming, Georgia, is coming together to support Grayson and Lauren, just like they did Kaylee in Wisconsin and so many other thousands of kids around the country. And Lauren now has a social network. People she hangs with, people that support her and Grayson. And it's made an incredible difference. And they have an incredible pack. And it's fun to watch them on that journey. And in a way, I'm seeing history repeat itself. Because my story, and the reason I'm up here, is because of a group of adult scouters in Macon, Georgia, who came together and supported my family when my father passed away when I was 11. I was at a scout meeting and they came to get me. And those had a saint of a mother, but we were from the wrong side of the economic tracks and weren't sure how you're going to get from here to 20 years old and explore Congress in Washington, D.C., where I met my wife for 44 years. There were a lot of adult volunteers and professionals in that 10-year interim that made the difference for me. So it's payback time, right? You understand that? I think that's why you're here at some level. Scouting has touched your life. And it's time to give back, and particularly now. Our country needs this movement. We don't need to talk about the headlines to understand that. We know this program works. We know it changes lives. But we have to be serious about execution and growth coming out of this period in our history. And I think we can do that. So, when you get a little frustrated, think about Philmont, this human laboratory of the soul, how many lives we've changed out here, and Kaylee, and Grayson, and Elliot, and how many other stories do you know? In fact, that's my challenge to you, is we'll share my email and phone number and everything. I want to hear the stories of real life scouts today who have that look, right, that you have connected with, that demonstrate in their soul, they understand this program, They're involved today because they want to be involved today. And we need to identify their stories, just like people I've talked about, and use that as part of our story moving forward. Coming out of reorganization, we need to have our scouts explain to America, ask America to join, frankly. But we need more stories, because we're collecting these and then redistributing them to the councils in an organized way. And my guess is in this room, I've probably got 10 great stories, maybe more. But let's hear them. Let's share them. Let's let it lift our souls, because that's why we do what we do. So thank you for being here. You are incredible. You really are an inspiration. We have a few minutes for Q&A. Faculty, yes? Anything you want to talk about, anything you want to know? Anything you disagree with, that's okay too. Yes, sir.
It's so easy to criticize, and so when you read articles or tend to be critical of the Boy Scouts because these people haven't done anything big. But I heard one about councils selling their property and not always selling it for the same use for which it was acquired. The council selling it for high-density housing and condos and other things. Any worries about, or any guides or anything we could be engaged in about that kind of thing? Because it's about the mission of the place. And I understand they're not a rock and a hard place about making money for the settlement, and it's the darn lawyers.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about the lawyers on the trail.
Yeah, well, what worries me, he is one, so
Oh,
he
they're all
kind
over
of
the
has
place.
license to tell lawyer jokes.
Couple of reactions. At the end of the day, the local councils have agreed as part of this trust fund to contribute a certain amount, $625–650 million. And it's, in my view, speaking for myself, it's not our role as a national organization to tell the local council how they are going to use their specific assets. And there are a lot of painful stories out there of councils, selling service centers, selling camps. Could some of them turn into condos and apartments in an area where we've had green space for 100 years? Yeah, that could happen. It also needs to cause us to think differently about how we go about delivering outdoor programming, for instance. We have in the BSA something like 952 camp properties. Think about that number. For $1 million in membership. We have councils that compete with each other for summer camp attendance 20 miles apart. Okay? Rather than picking up the phone and saying, wow, what can we do together? And we do have to break down some boundaries. And we've got a lot of councils that will be financially challenged coming out of this period. Probably more due to the pandemic than the bankruptcy. But we'll have councils that already have severe liquidity problems. And we're going to have to figure out how to support them through this process. And frankly, doing some things together when we haven't done that before, when we've actually been competing between councils, is part of what I think needs to happen. Are we going to have some painful decisions? Yeah. I have a daily Google feed for some odd reason of scout articles. An article in the U.S. that contains the word scouts. I can tell you right now, most of the stories, I'd say 80% of the stories are positive. Which that's part of the momentum I think we have going. But we see stories, that the X and X park and X and X lake, is being lost. We also have stories of how local folks are coming together sometimes to buy it out. So we can fund the trust without having to sell the camp. Local leadership, the board has to be empowered. Most of the time when I have gone in to support a council that's in trouble, and I have the distinction of actually being called into the first council, Charles probably doesn't know this story. They had threatened to file bankruptcy the next day. Okay? Never been done in the history of the BSA. Regional director calls me, I guess because I'm a lawyer, I don't know. I was the brand new area president at the time, sitting me in to try to deal with this. I went into their board meeting. It looked like a really bad district committee. Okay? They didn't have the right people at the table. We corrected that. They did not go into bankruptcy. They eventually did have to merge because it was a smart thing to do to deliver scouting in their territory. But you've got to work this through. Does that answer your question?
Well, it does. In large measure, thank you for wrestling with these things. I think in our own council, we got rid of one that we loved. My daughter had been the camp director, but it was buy a bunch of cabins. It wasn't the most wild land to begin with, and so yeah, it's a lot of tough things, but you get your article post by saying something negative and weird and new about the Boy Scouts too.
Well, you do. And during the bankruptcy, we did a lot of appraisals of properties. The claimant lawyers did a lot of appraisals of properties. Many billions of dollars worth of property assets. And of course, that got the attention of a lot of people.
Well, thanks for your work on those ugly things.
Day at a time. What else? Yes, ma'am.
Something that I feel so strongly about, and I'm hopeful Lauren feels this way in a very short time, is that cutting friends are the best of friends. And there are people that I don't work with anymore, but I esteem as my best friends.
No, I believe that.
In the last 10 years, the majority of my closest friends have come through acquaintance first, through Scouts.
Well, a little bit on the rest of the story. Lauren's best friend is the new leader of the pack. She's been fully trained, so they're doing this together.
They're going to just soar.
And they're rocking it. And I went on their family camp out a little while back, and it was a great experience. We had this family pull up next to our tent. We were helping people put up tents. They never put up a tent before, right? And this family pulls up in this large Suburban. And they were like, it felt like 20 people piled out of this. And you talk about the Scout family, delivering scouting to impact a family. This was the entire extended family. Grandparents, down to 2 kids in either bassinets or strollers. Okay? And then we had to help them put up their tent. And this tent was bigger than their Suburban. And they set it up 2 feet from our tent. But we helped them do it because that's where they wanted to be. So we heard everything that went on in their tent all night long. And they were speaking a different, literally speaking a different language. Okay? But they were thrilled to be there. It was great. It's great stuff. What else? Yes, sir.
Scott, what can we do to reassure our current or future charter partners that their liability exposure is no different than it was before? There seems to be this perception that there's a lot more liability than before, and what can we do to reassure them that they should continue this role?
Excellent question. I think the short answer is that we have insurance in place to handle any number of chartered partner relationships, okay, whether it be a traditional chartered partner, which is where we would love to stay, to a use agreement, to other things like councils owning the unit, if you will. We have presented to the Scout executives a number of alternatives that they can use in their community for how scouting works in their community. So we should never lose a unit because we've lost a charter partner. So we've got that in place today. The whole insurance thing, we have insurance, and we just finished discussions with the Methodist Church, you probably heard about. Insurance was a big part of that discussion and making them feel comfortable. You know, the whole insurance thing, it's a big issue. People don't realize, you know, hear complaints about $72 fee, now the $75 fee. Okay? $35, $38 of that amount goes to pay for insurance. Think about that. And before we do anything else to deliver scouting, most of this is going to insurance. Now the good news is claims, sexual abuse claims, are way down. Youth protection is working. Can we do it better? Yeah. Can we make it more user-friendly? Yeah. How do we get a scout family member, a cub, my next door neighbors, okay? Have they been youth protection trained or background checked when they showed up at camp out? No. Okay. How do we bridge that gap? Okay. How do we make sure scouting is safe so I can tell the mother who's 33, who has 3 kids, has never had anything to do with scouting, that scouting is safe? We've got to answer that question. We're going to need some time as we get past bankruptcy for the insurance markets to adjust. Okay. Our claims right now are largely car accidents and slip and falls. That's what most of the claims are. Hopefully in 2 or 3 years, we'll be in a better position. We've got more insurance today, even though it's less than we had a year ago. We have more insurance today than we've ever needed for the claims that we've experienced. So I think we've got the answer for the charter partners. And we can tailor it to what their needs are in a way that works for us and them.
I love what you said about we're not going to lose a unit because we lost a charter. That's
Right. All right. Thank you so much. God bless you.